You are listening to the War on the Rocks podcast on strategy, defense, and foreign affairs. My name is Ryan Evans, and I'm the founder of War on the Rocks. In this episode, I spoke to my new friend Sándor Ésik. He's an attorney practicing in Budapest, Hungary. He's also a blogger and an activist for democratic causes. He has a Substack called the Hungarian Muse, which you should read and subscribe to. He also has his own podcast. We spoke about Peter Magyar's victory over Viktor Orbán, who ruled Hungary as prime minister for 16 years, what it means for Hungary itself, as well as its relationship with countries around it and in Europe. Enjoy the show. How did you first get involved in writing about, observing, participating in Hungarian politics?
Well, it was almost 15 years ago, and basically it was my drive to write. So it didn't start it as a political blog, it started as a personal blog, but I was working for a guy who was a member of parliament, so he was participating in election campaigns, and slowly but surely all my work was about politics, so I started to write about it, and I was pulled in this kind of blogging more than 10 years ago now.
There's just been a big election, of course, in Hungary and a major turn of events. For those of our listeners who don't follow European politics closely, can you just give us a very brief explanation of what happened?
The Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, was defeated after 16 years. He started out as your basic liberal politician 16 years ago, but
even funded initially by his great enemy, George Soros.
Yes, but that was back in the late 1980s. But gradually he grew close to Putin and started to work as Putin's agent within the EU, more like a Trojan horse. And in the last couple of years, maybe last 5 years, he's been actively sabotaging politics in EU. And since the war in the Ukraine broke out, he always vetoed the sanction packages. He tried to get Russian billionaires off the sanction lists, and he was a pain in the neck in the European politics, and he grew real authoritarian tendencies back at home, and he managed to completely ruin the Hungarian economy. So after 16 years, the situation was ripe for a new opposition party to emerge, and led by a former member of Orbán's party, and now that opposition party finally toppled him.
And Magyar was a former member of Orbán's own party.
Yes, he was. He held positions in the background, like Orbán's party is called Fidesz, so he was like CEO of Fidesz-related companies. His wife or ex-wife was the justice minister and later the leader of the Fidesz party list on the EU European parliamentary elections. He left Fidesz after a big scandal 2 years ago. It's called the pardon scandal or the pedophile scandal. It was about an orphanage where the director of the orphanage abused the kids. His deputy tried to cover it up. He tried to convince the kids not to testify in court, but he was also convicted for this, and he was somehow related with someone in Orbán's close circles, and the president of Hungary pardoned him. But in order to do that in Hungary, you need the signature from the justice minister. So both the president of Hungary and the justice minister was forced to resign, basically to save Orbán's skin. And many say that was the motivation for this new guy, Péter Magyar, because the way they treated
So he was
the
no
ex-wife.
longer in politics when this happened?
He was never in frontline politics. He was always on the background. And many say that the reason why he stepped up is because the way they treated the ex-wife, the mother of their 3 children.
What are his politics? What's his political ideology? I mean, I assume he's conservative. I've read that he's conservative given his background in Fidesz.
Most of his political messages resembles Orbán's political messaging for 2008 or 2007, because Orbán had a switch from this moderate, pro-Western conservative thought towards this Putinist Eastern conservative line. Peter Magyar's messaging is basically a revival of the old pro-Western conservative line of Orbán, which is quite popular because the Hungarian society tends to be more conservative. So probably the divide is not like 50-50%, but like 65 to 35 towards conservatism.
Could you tell us how political life and social life changed in Hungary under Orban? You mentioned authoritarian. You know, there's quite a few people in America on the conservative side have argued, well, Magyar won the election, so Orban was never an authoritarian. We worried too much. What do you say to that?
If you compare Orban with people like Erdogan or Putin, yes, he was a soft authoritarian. Most of his success was based on the fact that Hungary received a lot of money from the EU. And like in the first 8 years of his rule, like the very good international financial environment, so the quantitative easing, lots of cheap loans. And basically he convinced Hungarians that he is the source of this money and not the EU and the international markets. And when he lost that money, he started to reform the election laws, subtle changes, but those subtle changes ensured that the opposition parties were always divided and they couldn't integrate in a comprehensive large opposition movement. But when the Hungarian economy became really bad and there were big troubles, those old opposition parties completely lost their relevance. And basically the time...
Was that because of the reforms that Orban made or something else?
They couldn't... in the 2022 elections, they even held an opposition primary to find the guy who will lead them. The primary took place, but they never backed the guy they elected. So they became ridiculous, discredited. So the Hungarian voters were looking for a new opposition. And this is what Magyar sold them, or sold for us, that this is a new, unified, credible opposition power, and the whole election system was designed for these disintegrated small parties. Orban never thought that party of equal power will emerge from that.
Interesting. So he did create changes to the system that made it less free and less fair, but it was targeted at keeping the smaller opponents small and divided.
Yes, the EU said that the Hungarian elections are free but not fair.
And how did the media landscape change during his rule? Because there was a lot of consolidation.
Yes, there was a lot of consolidation, also a lot of subtle legislative changes. For example, no company who wanted any state-related contract advertised with independent media. So that turned independent media towards subscriber income and click-based advertisement.
So basically, the message was sent out, or was it a law that...
It was just a message, informal message.
If you advertise with these media outlets, you're going to lose your business.
Yes. Imagine being a media as a smaller podcast or blog, you can rely on subscriber contact, but like on a nationwide level, you can't do that. So you need money from advertisement, income from advertisement. But it turned it into a machine where everyone was trying to get more clicks from like Google AdWords type of advertisement. And it created an echo chamber, which was always talking about Orban and not about the real problems. And it was good for Orban because everyone was talking about him.
But was it critical of Orban ever?
Yeah, it was critical of Orban, but it worked like a drug, because if you always talk about Orban, it leads to a situation when Orban can feed you with talking points, and you just never realize that you are basically amplifying Orban's message even when you criticize it. So they never realized that actually they shouldn't talk about Orban, they should talk about something else, and that was driven by the need of clicks and subscriber income.
Was dissent ever directly punished? I mean, he never crossed the red line of jailing political opponents. But what about normal people who protested or dissented in some way? Were they ever persecuted directly? Or was it all indirect?
No. He never crossed that line, because the way Hungarians work, and the Soviets had to learn it in a hard way back in 1956, that we can take almost unlimited amount of soft power and soft oppression, but in the very moment when it turns hard, Hungarians go and do a revolution. So Orban very wisely refrained from hard dictatorship. Everything he did was soft and subtle. Everything you ask about it, I will have to go like a 10-minute explanation on how it exactly worked on the Hungarian people's mind. Orban was really good at reading Hungarian people's mind and reactions, and towards the end, he lost that.
Was corruption a major problem?
Oh,
yes,
yes, it was.
Problem? How does that manifest itself? Can you give us some examples, aside from this sort of pardon that set off the scandal, which is obviously an example of corruption?
It started off as like classical corruption, but within 6-8 years, it became a complete state capture. This was the main source of economic problems. One is because the EU cut the funding, but the other problem was that the system became so centralized that everyone was lining up for business at Orban. And in that situation, it's not only the companies who are there asking for business, but individuals asking for money. So in the last 3-4 years, you couldn't tell whether if it's a real business asking for just, getting a contract to build a road or something like that, or is it someone who just wants money by kissing Orban's ass?
So I'm not going to ask you to predict the future, but I'd like to give our listeners the benefits of how you're thinking about the future. So I can see a number of different futures for where this goes next. Maybe he'll fulfill all of his campaign promises, crack down on corruption, reorient in a more friendly way towards the EU and the West, eliminate Russian influence. Hungary is riddled with Russian intelligence, but it could also go another way. He could use the system that Orban has built to his own advantage. What do you expect? What are the signs we should look out for?
Probably the most important thing is that Hungary is dependent on EU money. And the EU Commission have really detailed requirements for the Hungarian government. It's like a 27-point list, and Magyar has to fulfill those.
Or what?
There are 18 billion euros frozen for Hungary, and we desperately need that money because Hungarian economy is small, very small, compared to, it's smaller than probably the size of Iowa in terms of GDP. So we need that money so the EU can keep Magyar on a real short leash, because they realized that they made a mistake when they didn't keep Orban on a short leash. So the EU will do that. I don't know the personality of Magyar, but his messaging so far is common sense politics. So he wants to return to a situation when the military is led by a soldier, the healthcare is led by a doctor, that kind of situation, which was not the case for the last 5 years of Orban, when political cronies were leading the ministries. So his main message is to return to common sense politics.
What should we expect on Ukraine? Hungary under Orban has been hostile to Ukraine, running interference for Russia, all sorts of things related to energy and military supply, sanctions. Should we expect any change? Did Magyar talk about any of this on the campaign trail? Or
no, on a campaign trail, Magyar had a really tricky job to do because Orban's propaganda was so loud that it implanted a lot of ideas into the Hungarian minds. One of them being anti-Ukraine, anti-LGBTQ, anti-other things. He had to very carefully avoid those topics because otherwise he would have been bogged down in those debates. Now that he won, I think he still can't do that because Hungarians still have those ideas implanted by Orban's propaganda. But I think what he will do is simply not being an obstacle anymore. So and I don't think that either Zelensky or the EU expects anything else. I mean, don't sabotage us. If you are passive, it's okay. If you don't come out loving Ukraine, it's okay. Just don't sabotage the efforts of the EU. And I think Magyar is more than ready to do that.
Do we know if he's talked to Zelensky?
Yes, and they already talked, but briefly. But they will have more talks after he was sworn in 2 weeks from now.
And what kind of government should we expect him to put together? And you mentioned a soldier, right? People that know their brief, but do you think, I know he's given quite a lot of long press conferences. I've read that his communications team gets quite stressed because he likes to speak off the cuff and at length. Has he given any signals is he going to try to do some kind of a unity government, or is it all going to be people from his own party? Because he got quite a large proportion of the electorate.
Yes, one of his main campaign messages was bringing experts in the government. So we already know 9 or 10 ministers out of the 16 he promised we will have, because Orban integrated ministries together. So he had 8 ministers or 7 ministers sometimes. Magyar will have 16, so standalone ministries for most areas. And we already know 9 or 10 names, and so far they are all experts. So it's part of the common sense messaging he does that most of or all of the names we know so far are names a good HR department would choose. Someone with professional experience, leadership experience, no big scandals, the common sense guy who you would hire for your own business type of names. Most of them are new to politics. Magyar will have 141 seats in out of 200 in the National Assembly, and
so a healthy majority.
Yeah, it's a super majority, so he can change the constitution if he wants to, and I think he will. Most of those 140 names are new guys without prior political experience.
You told me a story earlier that was quite shocking about what Orban's son wanted to do in Africa. Tell us that story.
Yeah,
it's quite wild.
It was one of the big scandals before, like 10 days before the election. A military captain called Szilveszter Pálinkás came out to the press wearing full uniform, and he told two things basically. One is the dire state of the Hungarian armed forces, which is quite well known. We don't have a really good army. But the other story was that this is a big guy, like 6'5", muscular guy. He was a classmate of Orban's son in Sandhurst.
And Orban's son is an active duty army officer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, I think he was his bodyguard in Sandhurst, but also graduated from Sandhurst. And he told this story about the planned Hungarian mission in Chad in Central Africa. It was in the news a couple of months ago, and no one could tell why the hell would Hungary have a military mission in Chad. There's not an international like NATO mission or
it's
EU
just a
mission
Wagner
there.
group, basically.
It's just a Wagner group there and some like tribal forces. Why would the Hungarian army go there with 200 soldiers? And it turned out that it was because of Gáspár Orbán, like Orban Jr.'s religious views, because he's a member of some kind of like neo-Christian cult, and he thought that
So he's not Catholic?
No. I mean, Orban's family is... Orban's wife is Catholic, Orban himself is Protestant, but this guy is a member of this sect. And he believed that Hungary should actually, I don't think there's a better word to describe it, conduct a crusade in Chad to protect Christians in Chad. And what the really shocking thing that this captain says was that Orban Jr. thought that a 50% casualty rate would be acceptable. I mean,
and Orban Sr. signed off on this?
Yeah. When the scandal broke out, they tried to deny it. But now, after the election defeat, some documents were already made public, and it was real. They really wanted to send a contingent there. Why? I don't know. I mean, no one knows, and the only explanation is the one we know from this captain, and and the Hungarians, believed it because this Orban Jr. is a very controversial guy.
This brings up a larger question. Orban Jr. is obviously a major example of this, but the Hungarian security services and armed forces there's a major counterintelligence problem. One, there's a lot of Russian assets.
Yes,
and two, there's a lot of corruption. And a lot of people in the ranks and in the security services that are corrupt and have taken part in repression and illegal investigation of opponents, which Orban was engaging in all the time. Even if he wasn't putting opponents in jail, there was phone tapping scandals and all the electronic eavesdropping and all this other stuff. Now that you have Magyar in charge, assuming that he actually does take Hungary in a more democratic direction, as you predict he's most likely to, at least at first.
But he has to.
Yeah, he has to because of the funding from the EU. How does Hungary rid itself of these kinds of people in a way that is still democratic and accountable? So it's not like a purge of people just because of their political beliefs, because it's not illegal, nor should it be, to be a supporter of Orban or Fidesz in the security services. But we're talking about the people that have engaged in corruption, have engaged in illegal activity, are assets of foreign powers. How does that happen in a way that is democratic and accountable?
Well, you are overstating a problem a little bit here, because we just have a fresh poll after the election by the same pollster who predicted the outcome within 1%. And it shows that the support of Orban's party is already below 25%. So you don't really find Orban supporters right now.
Well, it doesn't take that many people in powerful positions like security services and the military to cause problems.
And those people will be summarily replaced.
You think so?
Yes. The nature of the thing is that, just as you mentioned, you need 10%, 15% in the right positions to control it. The rest is, okay, guys like everyday cops and agents. they are more than ready to serve under Magyar, and they will just remove the others. I guess foreign services, mostly German and American, not Americans right now, but the Germans will have some information about whom to remove from certain positions, and I guess it will happen. I mean, some of those guys are smart enough to leave before they asked to leave, but they are asked to leave.
There's going to be a lot of corruption investigations.
Yes.
Coming. Yeah.
So whoever Magyar appoints to do that, to do this, he will have a list of names, and it won't be a really long list, and they will do it almost overnight.
And last question I have for you. One of the many scandals leading up to the election is there was this transcript of this call between Putin and Orban leaked, where Orban was saying, "Let me help you. You're the lion. I'm the mouse, removing the thorn from your paw," or whatever it is.
Yes.
And which is really just a lead into me asking, what reactions have we seen from Russia about the Hungarian election?
Well, there was another leak about the foreign minister talking to
Oh, yeah, there was a additional one as well.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Peter Szijjártó, the Hungarian foreign minister, talking to Lavrov, and it was even more embarrassing because there's no better word. He was simping. And
they were speaking in English, which I found funny, but I guess makes sense.
Yeah.
Their only common language. Yeah.
The Russians, I guess, even before the elections, because of the big penetration within the Hungarian government and secret services, I guess they've seen some genuine data about how the polls look like. So they expected this. Probably not the scale of it, but they expected the fact that Orban will lose his office. They very quickly cut losses here. So some reporter asked Lavrov just days after the election that, "What do you think about your friend Orban?" And Lavrov's answer was, he's not a friend.
Thank you for listening to this episode of War on the Rocks. Do not forget to check out our membership program at warontherocks.com/membership. Stay safe and stay healthy.